We are turning to your beloved Mayo, though. They're up against Roscommon and Castlebar at 7 o'clock this Saturday. Lee McHale, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Owen. How are you?
Very well, thanks. So we'll start with Mayo. We'll get into Roscommon in just a moment. Obviously, a fantastic league campaign for Mayo. The result that everybody expected, really, in New York a few weeks back. But the question, I guess, over this is how many times can you go to the well? How many times can this team really get back to the pitch that they brought, say, under peak Horan or under peak Rochford and indeed under Holmes and Kennelly? Can they do it again this year in terms of getting to that level?
I think they can, Owen, because one of the main reasons is the influx of young players that have come in. I remember in my time in 96 and 97, once the young players come in, you have some jaded players. They're mentally fatigued, just as you said yourself, going to the well so many times trying to win that elusive All-Ireland final. But when you bring in the likes of young Rowan and Tracy and these guys, they give all the veteran players a new lease of life, to give them some energy and some enthusiasm. And I think we saw that in the league. I think the mix is very, very good on now at the moment. You've like three tiers of players. You have the really young guys, like the fellas I've mentioned. Then you have Jeremy O'Connor and the likes of Paddy Durkin, exceptional players in their early 20s. And then of course you've got Keith Higgins, Andy Moore, Ed Moshe, Lee Keegan, Colin Boyle, the leaders of the team. So what I've seen this year, especially from the young fellas, is very, very impressive. I think there's massive strength in depth there, up there now with the Tyrones, the Kerrys, and the Dublins, of course. And that would give me great optimism for Mayo for the summer, because I think the mix is as good now as it's been in a long, long time.
Liam, given what happened in that Kildare game last year and the scrutiny the probably team was under, how important was it for James Horan when going in to introduce all these younger players? Because as Owen touched on there about the side has kind of moved on over the years with the similar players that have played for the last 3 or 4 seasons now without any real introduction of new blood. How important was it for the introduction of those new players?
Well, you know yourself, Kevin, when a couple of new good players come into the team, especially a team that's been through so much, it gives everybody a massive lift. I remember it happening in my career when I was 31, 32, and 96, 97. All those young lads coming in and say, oh my God, I thought this was all over, but maybe it's not. These guys can really bring us on, So you've got massive enthusiasm, you've got massive energy, and that can do nothing but lift the veteran players. And I think that's what we saw, Kevin, this year in the league, especially in the latter part of the league, in the league final. The energy and the enthusiasm that came from the young players. And the amazing thing, there's 4 or 5 of them there that seem to be ready to go. There doesn't seem to be a 2 or 3 year waiting period. Now, I know things are going to get harder starting on Saturday evening, but once the energy now and the competitiveness in these in-house games, I believe, are absolutely unbelievable, because the 35, 36 players now pushing for places, and you have 4 or 5 all-star veterans that are struggling to get minutes now, and that has to develop a real strength and a real competitiveness in the group. And when you get to a stage where your in-house games are as tough as your championship matches, then you're in a really good place. And I believe that's what's been happening with Mayo for the last 3 or 4 weeks.
It's interesting that you bring up your team of the mid to late 90s, Liam, because I think there are a lot more parallels than people believe there, and you've outlined a lot of them yourself. And the question that's been asked of Mayo, especially since the end of the first James Horan era, since their dominance in Connacht has waned a little bit, is should Mayo be going for Connacht a little bit more to get through the front door? And ultimately, if there was a back door in the late 90s, you don't know how that Mayo team would have turned out, say, in 98 and 2000 or whatever it may have been. Like, in terms of those parallels, like, I know it was my question at the start as well, just how big a mental toll is it to actually keep going back and trying to get through the front door? So that means peaking earlier in the season.
Yeah, and it all depends on who you get early. If you get a Roscommon or a Galway early, you're going to have to be at, like, as you said, peak performance, and that takes its toll for sure. Because if you win your Connacht title and get all the way to August, September, it's very hard to keep that going. You're not going to be able to peak for the whole summer. So that's a very difficult thing to do. But the way things are going now with the qualifiers, it takes a small little bit of pressure off. It's not a must-win game. Whoever wins or whoever loses on Saturday is going to get another shot at it. But I would imagine that Mayo, after not winning a Connacht title in 3 years under James Horan this year, they'll be very keen on to get that Connacht title back. I think a league title is very impressive and very welcoming. I think a Connacht title is a must, and then circle the wagons, take a couple of days off, and then take on the Super 8s with that strength and depth that we talked about. But I think this Mayo team now will have nothing else in their minds but winning on Saturday night and getting into a Connacht final and getting the crack at Galway.
We were thinking before coming on air about some of your great encounters as a Mayo player against Roscommon, and this year is the 30th anniversary of that dogfight, I think it's fair to say, in Castlebar. It was a draw on that one. You got the job done in the replay and then got back to an All-Ireland final for the first time since 1951. 1989, 30 years ago, what do you remember of that year, Liam, and the hope around Mayo football at the time?
Well, it was I was only a little, I think I was 22 or 23 at the time, and it was like a whirlwind for me, really roller coaster ride. My father died the day of that drawing match, and I had to kind of get myself together and get ready for the replay. So like that was a very tough time for me personally, but my teammates all rallied around me. John O'Mahony rallied around me, and we got through that Connacht final, and we're delighted to do that. But we had a massive win against Tyrone in the semi-finals, and then on after that, it kind of went. The fans went crazy, and we had great difficulty in trying to keep a lid on it. And we, even though we performed well against Cork, that was a great Cork team led by Larry Tompkins and Shea Fahy and Paul McGrath, but we just couldn't get it done. I think we threw that away, even though they were as good as they were, and they'd lost to Meath in the two previous All Irelands. We had some great opportunities. I remember at the end of that game to win it, and we just fell short. And obviously, we thought we'd be back the following year, but like what we talked about earlier on, we got Galway in the first round. We were about we were a little bit off, and I think they fell by a point in 90. And then I think there was a lot of veteran players then going into their 30s at that stage. That team broke up shortly after that. So that was a pity. It'd be one of my big regrets. I really felt that we had a great chance of winning that, and we didn't do it. And I suppose the rest is history.
Yeah, it is. When you look back on that year, it is kind of the start of what has become an incredible journey, as much as there has been heartache on the pitch of this Mayo team, of the cult of the Mayo supporters especially. 89 really was the start of something, Liam, I think it's fair to say. And like you mentioned, the grief you were going through at the time, I guess being in the middle of it as well gave you the realisation that there was something special going on, given the arm around your shoulder that was provided by John O'Mahony and I'm sure a lot of your teammates.
Oh yeah, like the support was unbelievable, and I felt I was a basketball player on, and I wasn't sure how much I really loved the game of Gaelic and how much I loved playing for Mayo. And after that year, I realised, and wanted to really put as much of an effort in as I could to help the team.
We've lost Lee McHale there. We'll get him back in just a moment. I presume he was talking about 89.
I actually wanted to ask him about where Connacht football is in general at the moment, certainly around Roscommon as well, going into this weekend as well. How strong does he see Roscommon? Where does he see this game going as well? Because I think there's certainly with Galway, the way that they're playing, I'm not too sure we can take too much out of their win against Sligo last weekend as well. But it's an interesting time, I think. Yeah,
Roscommon are really impressive against Leitrim in the first round.
Very, very impressed. It was I'd say it was a comfortable enough win. They wouldn't necessarily see it as that, but they made it look comfortable with how they played. So Roscommon were very impressive in that game against Leitrim.
Yeah, and like obviously you mentioned that all-day performance against Sligo. I was going to say it's kind of hard to know what sort of performance to read into too much, but I think maybe we got carried away with actually the importance of Royslip and how tough it is to actually go there, that perhaps them just getting over the line was the most important thing.
Yeah.
We do have Lee McHale back, and we should kind of, I guess, just focus our attention really on kind of more of the last couple of years. James Horan I don't think he's lost a game at all in the Connacht Championship. Liam obviously won down this year. The landscape though is hugely different to how it was 5 years ago since his last stint as Mayo boss. Like, has his stamp on the team this time around, granted we've only got the league and one championship game to judge it on, has that stamp been quite different to how it was in 2014?
Well, I think all the veteran players want to be delighted that James is back. He's the guy that they wanted, I think, all along, and that coupled with the influx of young players coming in has everybody playing well and playing with a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, as I said earlier. So, the team has played very well. I prefer the way they play now than they did, say, 5 or 6 years ago. They're not as attritional when they have the ball. They don't take it into the tackle as much. They're playing with a lot more pace and a lot more spacing, and that comes down to some of the younger lads as well. This young Rowan kid in the middle of the field looks like he's the real deal. So I think in games gone by, the team was worn out 4 or 5 years ago, worn out with 10, 15 minutes to go, especially against the Tyrones and the Dublins of this world. So I think they're a lot smarter now. I think they play with a little bit more ball movement, a little more pace, and that makes them more difficult to defend. And obviously they're huge around the middle of the field still. They can really be physical with teams, and even though their backs are getting older, their backs are still very, very good, very tenacious, and defend very well as a unit. So it's similar, but I think it's a little bit more polished now and a little bit more, it's certainly a good bit better offensively, I think.
Just on Matthew Moran there, we look back at last summer and the Tom Parsons and Seamie O'Shea injury. A lot of people would rightfully say that actually scuppered their chance of getting back into the Super 8s or getting into the initial Super 8s. In a strange way, though, it's allowed Mayo to adapt or to find a new midfield partnership, and I think it's fair to say Ruan and Aidan O'Shea were the midfield partnership of the spring. What has Ruan done to allow Mayo to get the best out of Aidan O'Shea in that position?
Well, young Ruan, he doesn't get rattled, it seems to me. No matter what position he finds himself in, he just seems to be able to be composed and make the right decision a lot of the times, And I think Aidan likes playing midfield, it's probably his natural position. He doesn't like playing with his back to the goal. I would have said in the past that he would be unmarkable because of his size and because of his skill set, especially with his left foot, that he'd be unmarkable on the edge of the square. There's not too many full backs that could mark him, but it's all about getting the players in their favourite positions as much as possible, and then you have happy players. But as the season goes on, and hopefully Mayo get into Super 8, it's going to get a lot more difficult because defending these top teams takes a lot of energy out of you, and you need a lot of athleticism around the middle of the field, especially playing in Croke Park in the Super 8. So that's going to take a toll on the lads as well, especially Aidan. So he needs to be in great shape and really be testing that GPS to, especially defensively now, to get the best out of the Mayo team, because our midfield partnership this year in the league has been very, very strong, and our half-back line is always strong, half-forward line is always athletic and strong, and that's the springboard to being able to put pressure on top-class keepers like Cluxton on the kickouts, and that gets a lot of scores from Mayo when they can do that. Yeah,
Aidan O'Shea actually did look in great shape across the league campaign, I thought anyway. It certainly looked to me like he'd lost a bit of weight, I think, across this summer, so across the winter, should I say, going into the spring, so I think that was a good thing. But Liam, I wanted to ask you particularly around this game this week and the Roscommon game. Roscommon were very impressive in beating Leitrim. Very, very good performance. Comfortable enough, I think you probably look at it overall, but it was the way, the manner in which they got the job done. How do you view this game this weekend then?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tough game, Kevin. I think Leitrim went into that game 2 weeks ago expecting to be competitive, maybe even expecting to win after the great Division 4 campaign they had, and they were really Roscommon disposed of them very easily, scoring 3 goals, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. Shane Killeorn scoring 2 of them. So Roscommon will be coming with lots of enthusiasm, lots of confidence. Despite the tough league campaign, I can't see Roscommon. Obviously, I know the lads very well, and I hope it's a good game. I think it'll be competitive for 3 quarters, but I think in the 4th quarter, Mayo's physical power and strength around the middle of the field, and the fact that they'll be bringing on all-star footballers in the last 15-20 minutes as subs will swing it in Mayo's favour, and I think Mayo will pull away in the end.
From your time with Roscommon, was your sense at the end that there was a kind of an idea of unfinished business around this team, because there was clear improvements during your involvement there? Could there have been another bit of improvement, and are they going to make that stride forward this year?
Yeah, well, I have to say now, I enjoyed every minute of working with the lads. There's a lot of really good footballers there, Jeremy Bertha, Enda Smith, Niall Kilroy, Tiger O'Rourke, just to name a few, and they're very ambitious and they're very keen. I have one major regret. Roscommon should have won 3 Connacht titles in a row. The first year, the drawn game in Salt Hill against against Galway, got hammered in the replay in Castlebar, won it the year after, and last year again scored the penalty. Conor Devaney to put Roscommon a point up, and then conceded 2 or 3 points, and I felt that game was kind of thrown away as well. So, the amazing thing is that Roscommon were in the last 3 Connacht finals, won one, and probably should have won the other 2 as well. So, again, like, they've been through a lot. They're more than Mayo, but not at the same level. They've been through an awful lot, lads, and they've been getting tougher and stronger as the years have been going on. And they're all, most of the key players now are 27, 28, getting up there and getting bigger and getting getting a little bit more used to these types of big games. Having said that, I go back to what I say. I think this Mayo team is in a great place. I think their strength and depth has never been as good, and I think that the fact that power in the middle of the field and the calibre of player that Mayo are going to be bringing on the last 20-25 minutes, I don't think Roscommon have that, and I think because of that, I think Mayo will pull away in the end.
In terms of Anthony Cunningham going into the role, he obviously knows loads about Roscommon GA. There's no question about that. Just like yourself and Kevin McStay knew the ins and outs of Roscommon GA more than pretty much anybody else involved in the county. But yet there might be a perception of Anthony Cunningham as an outsider, and that perception did exist. Granted, only in small circles around yourself and Kevin McStay. Is that ever an issue? Was that ever something that got into your head, or could it be an issue for Anthony Cunningham?
Well, I think obviously Anthony has been, a Bridget's club man for years. I remember he obviously managed Bridget's to the Kiltroom club to great success on, and I've met him so many times at club matches and county matches. It's unbelievable. So to clarify him or classify him as an outsider is ridiculous. But it's much better if you have everybody behind you. And if you have pockets around the county that don't support you, it affects the players and it affects the management. People say, they're in a bubble, and it doesn't, but it does. That's my opinion. And when that negative press comes out, it has to be dealt with and it has to be addressed. And there are things you don't want to be addressing and you don't want to be dealing with especially after a tough loss, because you have enough to be dealing with without dealing with stuff like that. And it's always a much better situation when you have the county behind you and the county board behind you and all the supporters behind you, for sure.
How much did it feel that the entire county was behind yourself and Kevin?
Well, obviously, yourself now, there was ex-county players that said they didn't like the fact that 2 Mayo men were walking the sideline and coaching the team on championship day, and that does take its toll. I suppose I can understand people maybe saying that about me, but Kevin has been living in Roscommon for, I think, over 30 years now. So as Kevin said, what does they want to do? Rebirth themselves, So I think it's just it's nitpicking, but it does have an effect. And I haven't heard any negative talk about Anthony and his management team, and I hope I don't, because it's a tough job. You're competing now, especially next Saturday, when you're competing against the big boys now, and for you to get wins at this level, you need everybody singing off the same hymn sheet. So I hope everybody's rolling in behind Anthony and giving him all the support that he needs, because he will certainly need it next Saturday.
Yeah, I always found it so strange. It doesn't matter where somebody's from, first of all, but second of all, the partnership, especially you mentioned Kevin McStay there and the knowledge you guys had of the county and essentially being in there for so long with Bridget or whatever it may have been. But also, even if you take that aside for one moment, it's also the results that you achieved. I mean, the Connacht title a couple of years ago, having Mayo by the pin of their collar in that first game in Croke Park then that summer as well. There was a clear sense of progress, but maybe some people just couldn't actually see beyond that.
Yeah, that's true. And you decide to do a thing a certain way. Kevin and myself would have a certain type of philosophy. A philosophy, we want to play expansive football. We want to play entertaining football. We feel you have to play that way to get the supporters behind you. I know the players, any players I've ever met, and Kevin has said they want to play that way as well. So we that's the way we go about it. That's the way we do it with Bridges. That's the way we did it with any other team we played with. That's the way we feel it should be played. And we also felt that if we were going to bridge the gap and do something bigger than winning a Connacht title, to beat the Mayos, to beat the Tyrones, to beat the Dublins, to beat the Currys, you have to play an aggressive, in-your-face, type of game. You know, that you can't just like take possession off. You can't let fellas solo up and down the field. You got to apply pressure all the time. And then when you have the ball, you got to be aggressive as well, and you know, play with good pace and good spacing, and move the ball and shift defenses around. And that's the way we wanted to play. We make no apologies for that. We beat Galway in Galway by 9 points in the Connacht final. There's no way that would have happened if we played a negative style of play, and each manager does what they have to do. We did it that way, and maybe people thought that we were being naive doing it that way, but we felt from year 1 to year 3, if we went to year 4, year 5, that we would bridge the gap, and we were trying to chase down the big boys. That's the ambition that we had, that we wanted to get into the Super 8 and be competitive in there and see could we get into a semi-finals and stuff. So that's the way we went about it. And as I said, we'll make no apologies for that.
Just the last one then on this, Liam. Obviously, like, there's a bug attached to being a manager of any team. Did you enjoy being involved with the very modern setup of an inter-county team, and would you go back into a setup in the future?
I enjoyed it. It's very, very hard work. You know, there's a lot of scrutiny, but like, you know, I'm an ex-player. I suppose Kevin will tell you as well. I'm a lot older than Kevin, but I'm an ex-player. I love sport. I love basketball and football, Gaelic football in particular. And there's no way I could sit at home 7 days a week looking at the television. That's for sure. So I love coaching. It's the next best thing for me. You get a great kick out of, you know, working on the training ground and then preparing for a game, and then going out seeing 21, 22-year-olds executing the game plan and getting better in front of your eyes. And that's the buzz I get out of it now. So I don't know. I'm getting old now. I'm 54. I'm 54 on the 1st of June. So I think it's club football now, and playing a bit of basketball, scrimmage basketball during the week is enough for me, maybe at the moment anyway.
Well, I was going to say congratulations on the induction to the Basketball Ireland Hall of Fame. I was about to ask, you obviously still play a bit.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm delighted. Like we had an unbelievable. We were very, very lucky to compete at the level we competed at. You know, to play in that era, the best basketball. You know, the best basketball era in the history of the sport. To play against the Neptunes and the Vincents and the Stars. The Seas from Belfast was fantastic, and you know, we had a great weekend last weekend, and you know, very enjoyable. But you know, that was just one of the most enjoyable times of our lives. We had a great time, and to win, to be successful in that era means an awful lot to us, you know.
Liam, can I just ask you one quick one on Galway? You mentioned the style of play that you were adopting at Roscommon earlier on. Galway do have a little bit more of a defensive setup to the game. They've had a little bit of criticism for their performances against London and even the Sligo game recently. So where do you see Galway over the next few years, and where they're going and the style of play they're adopting, and where do you see Galway this season in general?
Well, you know, they're going to be very tough to beat, Kevin, because of that defensive strategy. The traditionalists in Galway wouldn't like that over emphasis on defence, but they're at a certain level, and it's a very interesting question, Kevin. They're at a certain level now. They will pass to the next level, i.e. play Dublin, Mayo, Tyrone, Curry in an All-Ireland final, and maybe win that game unless they throw off the shackles. Somewhere along the line, you have to say we have to go out now and win this game. You know, keeping teams down to a low score and losing 11-8 as opposed to having a cut is not going to work. And that defensive strategy and playing negatively, I think they'll get you so far, but it won't get you to the highest level. And I think they have the athleticism now and the size and the physique and the forwards to be a little bit more expansive. And I'm sure you'll see adjustments from Kevin Walsh this year, because I think he understands exactly what they need to do now to bring it on from what they did the last 2 years.
Liam, you've been very good with your time this morning. Thanks a million for taking the call.
My pleasure, lads.
Thanks, Liam.
Have a good day. Take care, fellas.